Well, welcome again. I'm Nathan Merz. I'm going to be talking today about selling your Porsche. You also could take this presentation if you're looking at buying a Porsche and just basically take everything I tell you and look at it in 180 degrees reverse, and it should sort of apply for you. So let's jump to the next slide, Robert. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am if you don't know who I am. Again, so I'm on the National Technical Committee. I'm also in the room with my friend Mr. John Patrick in the back. He's our longest serving tech committee member, so he knows more than I'll probably ever even think to know. But my expertise is the market, valuation, quite a bit on sort of what's correct on a given model and how those things play into the market space. So you'll find me in Porsche Panorama magazine. I also write for a magazine called Avance. Again, I do Tech Tactics live and in-person events. And then I'm currently, I think, PCA's #1 YouTube creator. So please like and subscribe our YouTube channel. That helps our club. Believe it or not, if you don't know this, YouTube could be both a source of new members, but also a little source of funds, which keeps our membership dues low. And if we know anything about PCA members, we know, God bless, are we cheap. I was laughing last night. I've got a couple events here that were pretty good, but you had to pay and they were lightly attended. But they were giving out free movie tickets and the house was packed. It was pretty funny. I was like, wow, we do love a good freebie. I also do a lot of industry consulting on values and valuations, whether that be for estate purposes, various auction houses, the Haggerty Valuation Guide. And then I actually do this for a living. I buy and sell Porsches out of Seattle, Washington. My store is called Columbia Valley Luxury Cars. But more importantly, I'm just a person who loves Porsche. I love all Porsche. One of the missions I had years ago is I promised to never be that Porsche snob who only said, you know, one given Porsche was the best Porsche. That's simply not true. So we're going to talk about love for anything Porsche and all things Porsche. Okay, so we're going to talk today about how to sell your Porsche. This seems like a pretty obvious topic, but we're going to talk through it, and hopefully I won't talk so much. We'll get some time to do some questions and answers if you have them. So here's our goals today. We're going to talk about how to sell your Porsche and achieve your objective. And that seems like an easy thing. Of course, the objective would be to sell the car, but believe it or not, when I talk to most sellers, that's not always their objective. That seems really stupid. We're going to unpack what I mean by that. We're going to talk about whether it makes sense to sell the car yourself or whether you want to work with a professional. We're going to talk about how to prep your car for sale, you know, what to fix, what not to fix, what to disclose. We're going to talk about photography and video. Photography and video, if you get nothing else out of this presentation, are the single most important thing that you can do. Pricing. Probably behind photography, pricing is huge. If we know one thing about Porsche people, we know they're cheap. We also know that they personally think they have the best Porsche ever built, and so they tend to like inflate their pricing radically, so we're going to talk about what that means. It's kind of like I think my children are the smartest and cutest on the planet. Clearly they probably aren't, but I tend to think they are. We're going to talk about where to list the car. It's not always very obvious. There's some really good places to list your car, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And then we're talking a little bit about the safety of selling a car. Basically, how to show the car and not be taken at gunpoint, how to collect payment safely in today's crazy world, how to transfer the title and do some of that stuff. So let's just jump right into it. Always start with my caveats. These are not infallible techniques. These are just sort of best practices. Selling a Porsche is emotional. These cars become kind of part of who we are. We're not selling Chevy Cavaliers or Honda Accords. We get very caught up in this. And so sometimes I think of my job as part therapist. It's kind of funny. There's a lot of emotion at play when it comes to this process for people. And selling's not a precise science, right? There's a well-known path to success, but if you think that it's just this perfect process you follow and it delivers a perfect outcome, of course we know that's not true. Okay, so let's talk about common motivations, what your objectives are. So the obvious one, most people think, well, my #1 objective is to achieve the highest price. Believe it or not, when I actually talk to my clients and I talk to people out there, that's maybe in the top 3, but oftentimes it's not the number one objective, right? Because again, we know it's emotional, right? So believe it or not, a lot of what people worry about is how they feel about the transaction. Right? This is soft and squishy stuff. I'm putting my therapist hat on. Do they feel good with who their buyer is? Do they feel good about the process? Do they feel good about if they went with a professional, do they feel good about the relationship they have with that given vendor or dealer that handled the transaction for them, right? Funny enough, when I talk to people about seller's remorse, oftentimes it's about what happened to their car afterwards or the process, less so than about the absolute dollars, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to do some like deep breathing exercises. Talk about preservation of the future. For some of us, more important than dollars is what happens to our car. Does the buyer share our vision for this car? So if we have an all original paint 356 and then we find out our buyer turns it into an outlaw or a resto mod, how do we feel about that, right? In theory, it shouldn't matter. The next buyer, it's their car to do as they wish. But I get a lot of calls from angry people that say, look what someone did with my car. I have to remind them it's no longer their car, but it's kind of funny how this works. And then the other thing is ease. So anywhere in this process, sometimes I meet people and they want an easy process. And I said, well, an easy process costs you money. As long as you're okay with it, that's fine. Sometimes they want top dollar, but they want a super easy process. It's like anything in life, right? So if you want it easy, you're going to generally get less for your given car. Okay, so our first decision has to be made whether we go and sell the car on our own or whether we go with a professional. So obviously I have a bias, I'm a professional, but I've also sold a ton of my own cars over the years. And there's oftentimes where I recommend a person sells their own car, right? Generally our crowd, our Porsche Club of America members, have a higher level of sort of car knowledge and acumen around the market than maybe your average consumer, selling again their Honda Accord. The number one thing that helps with being the owner is you do get more control of the ultimate who the buyer is, right? So I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'll have someone approach me and they have a very unusual car they're very emotionally attached to. Maybe it belonged to their dad, okay? They're very emotionally attached, but now they also want top dollars. They said, well, put the car on, bring a trailer, but I don't want anyone to ruin the car. And I said, well, you got to understand, if you put on, bring a trailer, you have no say in who the buyer is going to be. If you don't care, that's fine, but you then later on can't be upset that someone bought your car that wasn't who you wanted or didn't have the same vision for it. That seems like an obvious statement, but I have to talk people through this. So as the owner, you can sort of self-pick who that person is going to be. A lot of people focus on this. They think, well, if I pay a professional, well, then I'm going to get less for my car. I don't necessarily agree that that's true, but potentially that could be true, right? Because you're not paying a fee. Generally, cars being sold by an individual will sell for a lower price than those sold by a professional, particularly cars that are being sold by professionals who are very well regarded in the marketplace. And of course, there's more work. You're the one doing all the steps along the way. So that's if you choose to do a car by owner. Why would you list the car with a professional? Generally, you're going to get a higher sale price. I mean, it's been proven time and time again. One of the other big things is access to the professional grade sales tools. So I'll give you an example. If someone sells a car through me, I have a whole litany of vendors that do all the various things that a lot of consumers don't necessarily know where to go. So I've got a guy who repairs wheel rash, and I've got a leather guy, and I've got a glass guy, and all these other things that I can access. And not to mention, I get a better rate, and I can get in the schedule. Who here has tried to have their Porsche repaired lately, and you can't get in for 3 months, right? I have the advantage of being able to, and a lot of the professionals do, you do enough volume that if Chip is my wheel guy, Chip says, hey, I'm out 3 months. I'm like, dude, Chip, you got to do me a solid. Chip's like, well, fine, I'll squeeze you in, right? So there's a lot to that. The other big thing that an expert's going to bring you is pricing expertise. A lot of people think that the biggest mistake in pricing is pricing your car too low. It's actually not true. Your biggest mistake is pricing your car too high. And that seems counterintuitive because you think, well, I can always lower my price, I can't go up on my price. But it's sort of like, I use the real estate analogy a lot because a lot of us have bought and sold homes. And we know how this is. You know, there's the dreamer in your neighborhood. They list the house, and everyone in the neighborhood knows their house is worth $650, but they put it out there for $799, right? Then the house gets stale. They finally get down there slowly. They start lowering it at $5,000 at a time, and you're thinking, buddy, you ain't getting there. By the time they finally get to the right price, it ends up selling for $620, right? Because everyone looked at the house and said, well, why has no one bought this house in 9 months? I think something's wrong with it. Same kind of thing happens in the car world. The other thing you get with a pro, and this is a key, you have to pick the right pro, we'll talk about how you do that, is you're piggybacking on their reputation. So if you pick a known seller in the Porsche world, then people say, oh, you're buying this car from XYZ, right? They are known to be market experts, they're known to do a good job, they're known to be honest and ethical, whatever that might be. Now, you as an individual seller may be all those things as well, but no one knows that, or generally doesn't know that. So in some ways, what you're buying is you're buying their reputation there. Of course, the drawback is the cost. You know, typical in our industry, about 10% is the kind of going rate. It can be a little bit lower, it can be a little bit higher, but it's about that. And that's whether you do a consignment dealer or if you do like an auction house, something like that. We'll talk about where you pick a venue there. And then, of course, the other big thing you lose is you have less control on who the buyer is. You know, they're going to make a decision about who's buying the car. That's sort of out of your hands. Okay, picking a pro. So you say, okay, I've got my car. Who should I list my car with? The number one thing you want to do is just do some research. Who's selling and doing well with your type of car in the marketplace? And it's not always the same seller. So Porsche race cars has a very, very different market space than someone who sells late model GT cars. Someone who's an expert at selling early, you know, bent window pre-A 356s is very different than someone who even sells early 911s oftentimes, right? So knowing who's good in that space. So start looking for comparable cars. You're going to be doing this anyway while you're doing some pricing research, and you'll start seeing some trends. So let's say you're selling a, you know, a track car, and you're looking at, you know, PCA prepped SC era cars. You start looking around there, and you've seen the last 5 have sold. Well, 3 of them have been sold by one seller, right? That might be someone you're going to look at. Doesn't mean you automatically pick them, but it gives you some sense of who's moving in that market space. The single most important thing you want to pick is reputation. Your car will forever be linked with that seller. I sometimes feel bad because people think cars are like people or something, like they have a little personality, or that dealer somehow like was raising them like their parent. So they'll say, oh, I don't like that car. It was once sold by this entity. Like, the car doesn't know it was sold by that entity, right? So I always tell people, inspect the car, and the car is sort of, can be removed, or they'll assign it from the venue. Like, this is my favorite one. Yeah, that car sold on eBay in 2018, so it's dead to me. Like, pretty sure the car didn't know it was on eBay. Now, it may be a lousy car. I mean, it very well could be, but just because it was on eBay, or people will do the opposite. They'll say, oh, this car was sold by, you know, whoever, so therefore it's a good car. It could be. Inspect it, right? The other thing is price is not your only consideration. So, and I can just speak from my own experience. You know, sometimes I get sellers, they'll come to me and ask me to sell their car, and they'll say, well, you know, I've talked to Bill over here, and Bill will sell my car for just 3%. So why should I pay you 10%? And I say, well, go talk to Bill. He's a great guy. I like him a lot. If he's a good fit, I don't have a problem with that. But I'm really honest. I say, look, I'm pretty good at what I do, and this is what I charge, right? And ultimately what matters is what comes in your pocket. And so, you know, if Bill, for example, is newer or doesn't have the same network, maybe he gets less for the car. So ultimately what goes in your pocket's lower. So you got to think a little bit holistically there. And then the other thing is, a lot of people in nowadays world, they'll say, well, gosh, I'm going to list, for example, an online auction. So I don't need to use a professional. I would argue in that environment, even more so you need a professional. If you look at results, for example, on Bring a Trailer, which is the largest venue, almost without exception, I can't even think of a single one. If you take the top 10 results in any Porsche category, every single time it's with a power cell. It's universal. It's across the board. Whether that's fair or not, they've kind of figured out the process, right? So, okay. Let's talk about cardinal rules. So let's say if you're going to pick a pro. Here's some cardinal rules I tell people, because there's always a lot of heartache around this, because I get a lot of these calls and they've broken one of my cardinal rules and they hope that I can solve the problem for them, and I tell them no. Okay, get an agreement in writing, right? So your agreement with your pro in writing should be, here is the minimum I will accept for the car. So you have a minimum sales amount, get the fee structure in writing, and also get all your fees and reconditioning in writing. So a very common thing, I tell people my industry has a very well-deserved bad reputation. People will say, oh great, they sold my car for $100,000, I'm paying them 10%, I'm gonna get 90, and then they get the bill and the guy says, oh, I spent $14,000 fixing stuff. And you're like, what? I didn't agree to that. And they show you the bill and they did all this stuff, right? So make sure all that stuff is agreed to in writing. Writing is good in any transaction. I love email more than anything because it records everything we said. So if I told a given individual, here's what I'm going to do, and later on we have any confusion, we can go back and I go, oh. And maybe I regret that I put it in writing, but I'm going to honor it because that's what we agreed to, right? So put everything in writing. The other thing is, please, 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 please never, ever, ever hand over the title before you're paid for the car. I don't care whether you've done 100 transactions with the person. I have my customers, they literally, God bless them, they're so trusting, they're like, oh, here's the car, here's the title, it's signed off, just handle it whenever. And I'm like, no, I will take an image of the title, you keep that, let's just keep each other honest. I said, when I get your car sold, I will give you money and you give me the title. Really straightforward. There's a couple very, very well-known entities in the car dealer space right now where people have lost literally seven-figure money because what happens is the classic shell game, you know, dealer X, he's selling these cars, the money comes into his account, he's had kind of a light month, he figures, well, Bill's in Europe for a few weeks, I'll just pay payroll, everything's fine, and then I'll get another car deal, well then that car deal doesn't come, and so now he tells Bill some fanciful story that his buyer's financing's held up, and next thing you know, he's 10 car deals behind. I won't go so far as to say this on camera, but there's very well-known cases happening right now of people you would be shocked this is happening to, so do not be that person. The other thing is set a realistic expectation up front. So one of the things that a true pro should do is they should set realistic expectations about timeline and pricing with you up front. So one of the things that happens, because again, back to this pricing thing, we oftentimes think our product is better than it is. So let's say we have a car, realistically it's worth $100,000, but this consignor, he knows he wants the business, you think it's worth 120, so he says, I'll get you 120. Well, then 90 days goes by, and then he starts telling me, gosh, have you seen them? The interest rates are up, market's kind of cooling, real estate's softening, we can't get you 120. Well, he knew that to start with, and you deep down probably knew that as well. You're just wasting each other's time, so let's just get to the right price. The other thing is set expectations around storage and utilization. I get this call all the time. In fact, I got one last week. An individual said, hey, would you be interested in selling my car? And so he sent me some details, and I said, well, isn't this car listed somewhere else? Let's just say that. And he said, yeah, but I'm going to pull it from them. And I said, okay, why are you doing that? And he said, well, I found an Instagram reel where they were out driving my car at an event, and I didn't authorize them to do that. And their answer was, well, we were out marketing it. Well, that could be a perfectly legitimate reason, but you better have some expectation around that, right? Or people that find out their car's being stored in the back parking lot outside, and your car's never been wet in a day in its life. It's a Concours winter here, right? And you didn't set that expectation. So make sure that that's really, really clear. Okay, prepping your car for sale. Now these rules will apply whether you're selling it yourself or whether you're selling it with a pro. The number one thing I always tell people, solve any easy issues before you put the car on the market, right? Okay, back to the house issue, right? So you got a house, you would never put photos of your house on the market if you haven't cut the lawn, right? Or if there's something just really, really easy to solve. Solve the easy, low-hanging fruit. A lot of people think, oh, I'll take a quick pictures, it'll be fine, I'll put it out there. The internet never forgets. Those photos are out there, and people don't have any vision. So they'll look at that picture and go, oh, that's an ill-maintained car. Don't fall victim to that. The other thing is every choice you make should have some thought around a return on investment, or ROI. And so one advantage of working with a pro is they generally will have some understanding about that. So what do I mean by that? Small cosmetic items almost always have a return on investment. Large items almost never do. So someone will come to me and they'll say, oh, last year, I had a full split case engine rebuild at this great shop and it was $47,000. I'm here to tell you, and except in extraordinary circumstances, you're not getting $47,000 back. If you did an IMS bearing replacement on a 1986 Boxster, you're probably getting your investment back, right? Or if you had a leather guide touch up scratches on the bolster, you're probably getting that back, right? So you have to think about where you spend money. So the basic way you do it is you try to take your seller's hat off and you try to put a buyer's hat and say, okay, if I'm looking for a car, so it's a 993, you're listing this car, and you look at your own photos, what stands out to you, right? What stuff's going to grab people? Because people scan the photos really fast and they'll make really snap judgments. So for example, if they see a driver's seat bolster that looks all worn out, looks like you always carried a buck knife in your back pocket, they're going to say, yeah, that owner was a bad person, right? Like, to me, it's funny. Like, you'd laugh at the comments I get from people. They'll ascribe personality traits. Like, they'll see something like that, and they're like, I'll bet you that guy's, like, verbally abusive. I'm like, wow, that's a reach. Maybe they just like this certain belt that scratches the seat, but, you know, or I'll see a car that'll have, like, a strut tie bar in the front, and they're like, they tracked that car. It's beat to death. I'm like, maybe they just thought it looked cool to have a strut tie bar in their car, right? So just try to look at the pictures and see what stuff is easy to solve. And some stuff that you can't solve, then those are things that we disclose. The other thing is know what your common issues are on your car and how you're going to attend to that question. So for example, if you have a first generation Cayenne, they're probably going to ask you about carbon shaft, or a 958, they're going to ask you about transfer case. Clearly, if you have an M96 or M97, they're going to ask about IMS or bore scoring, right? You have a GT car, they're going to ask about welded coolant pipes and over-rev report. Know what those issues are, and if you don't know, just for example, the best place to research this, go on Bring a Trailer, look at the last 10 auctions, and you'll see the same person beating the dang drum about some overhyped issue, right? Oh my gosh, the sky is falling, it's a 914, there's going to be a hole the size of Texas under the battery. Well, that tells you on a 914, you better show a photo of the hellhole, right? If you have a 958, a gas-powered 958, you better tell them what's the status of the transfer case. I mean, just know what those issues are going to be. The other thing that's so funny, I tell people, is go back to original, if at all feasible or easy. And this isn't a value judgment about any modifications you make. It's just a simple thing is, if you have a given car and the car is as close as it came from Porsche, no one gets an opinion or a judgment about it. It just is what it is. So for example, you have a 3.2 Carrera and you like the replica Cup 1 style wheels that a lot of people put on those cars in the 90s and 2000s, but you have the original Fuchs sitting in your garage. Do not list that car on those Cup 1 wheels. Do not. You literally will lose thousands of dollars because people will see the car, they'll see the picture and go, oh, I don't like it. Whereas if it has Fuchs on it, even if they later want to change the wheels, it appears in their mind exactly what they think it should look like, right? Same thing with the radio. I have people all the time, they go, wow, I like this Alpine head unit because it Bluetooths and Apple CarPlays and blah, 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 blah. It's great. I have no problem with that. But I'm telling you, people want that stupid, worthless Becker in the dash. It sounds terrible. Don't try to justify it doesn't have Bluetooth. Nobody cares. They just want that stupid Blaupunk that doesn't tune worth a crap and sounds horrible. That's just what they want. I kid you not. My whole job in life is just putting back original parts. I could sum up my whole career as just the guy who installs original steering wheels. That's what I do. The other thing is I'm a big fan of disclosure. So disclose anything that you can't remedy. So anything easy to remedy, remedy. Anything you can't remedy, disclose it. First off, because it's the right thing to do. But the other thing that's kind of funny in psychology, putting my therapist hat back on, is when you put a car out there and you tell people it's completely perfect, they know you're dishonest. There's no such thing, right? So when you disclose stuff, it's like you're sort of selling the psychology of, hey, this is an honest and ethical seller, someone I want to engage with. And again, it's the right thing to do. The other thing is that human nature says people want to find flaw in stuff. And so if you find it ahead of time, you control the narrative. You'd rather not have to get on your back feet and now you're on the defensive, where someone says, you haven't done this, or this is an issue. Now you have to defend your position as opposed to saying, hey, let's say you have a 986 and you have, I'll give you a perfect example. You haven't done the recall that Porsche did for Sport Chrono. Someone could say, it's got an outstanding recall. It's better to say, I chose not to do the recall because I'm going to neuter the performance on my car. Here's some information about that, whether you want to do the recall or not, right? Now I've told the story how I want to tell it. The other thing is, don't be surprised. Try to get everything done up front. So Carfax is a perfect example. I am not a fan of Carfax. If you've learned anything from my presentation, please don't call and tell me you bought a car and it's perfect because the Carfax is clean. I'm just going to laugh at you and it's going to feel awkward. I'm going to feel like a bad person. On the flip side, if you're going to sell something, run a Carfax so you don't get a surprise. Because believe it or not, there are so many times, like I'm actually in this process right now, I'm getting a 964 Targa in that I'm going to be selling for a client. And he's the original owner, right? And so we run the Carfax. He's like, well, don't bother. He says, I've had it since new. Nothing's ever happened to it. Well, lo and behold, on his Carfax, car's been in Washington his whole life. It shows in Colorado in like 2019, it had a service somewhere. I said, and the mileage is 100,000 more miles than the car has. Well, clearly someone typed in the wrong VIN number at a service center in Colorado, but now it's attached to his report. We can solve that, but I would much rather solve that ahead of time versus putting it out in the world and someone says, oh my God, that's an odometer rollback car. That would be catastrophic to the car. Find that out ahead of time. Same things with things like, paint meter. Put a paint meter on your car if you can find one. Buy one on Amazon. They're now cheap. And just make sure you have the answer there. I also recommend doing a PPI ahead of time. You can provide that to your buyer. But again, you'd rather not get a big surprise. So what I do when I get a car in, I always inspect it. And I usually do it with the customer present. And we'll put the car up on the lift. And there'll be some massive gaping leak. And they'll be like, I'm like, well, you can see it with your own eyes. I'm not shining you up on it. I mean, I'd rather know that, and then we can address it versus it comes back, and then now your potential buyer is upset. And then the last thing is, professional photography literally has 1,000x ROI. I mean, if you know nothing else, please, please, please do not take your camera phone into your damn garage. Just resist the urge at all costs. And even worse, the cardinal sin of literally digging through your phone and finding random pictures. Oh, here I am getting gas at Mount Shasta. Do not do that. Trust me, it never works out well. I kid you not. Or the worst one, my favorite one is people will wash it in their driveway and they take the photo with the bucket and the wet pavement and the soap still out front, which is code for I only wash my car every 3 years. Not to mention it's always a terrible photo. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about photos because it is so important. So again, buying a Porsche is emotional. Selling your car is emotional, but for the buyer, this is a very emotional thing. So what does photography do? Why, for example, is Instagram so popular? Why is social media so popular? Because it stokes emotion. right? So the vast majority of cars today are sold on your advertisement, wherever that might be, whether it's an online auction, a standard listing, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, whatever. The people respond emotionally to your photography. Fair or not fair, that's just how it works. So the idea is that you grab them emotionally, and then they can interact with you on a rational basis, which comes into things like your ad copy and those kinds of things. Again, just do not do that. The garage photos, I kid you not, probably someone could make an entire living. In fact, I know people do this. You buy cars that are just poorly advertised, you take the same exact car and you take rock star photography, and you can make your entire margin just on that, changing nothing about the car. I say 90% of sellers should hire a professional, and I have in big bold, automotive photographer. The other mistake I see all the time is like, oh, my nephew, he's a real whiz, he loves taking photos. When you look at his portfolio, he loves taking portraits of people skateboarding or birds or nature, right? Automotive photography is its own genre. So just because Sally has a super duper camera and she likes taking photos of her dog, doesn't mean she's going to do a good job with your car. Because obviously there's a certain skill set that's transferable if you know photography, but part of automotive photography is knowing the subject matter. The best photographer in any given genre knows the subject matter because, for example, let's take a Porsche. You have to know where to photo that car to capture the lines and how to capture the light. Like, how do you capture the silhouette of a 356 correctly? Well, unless you really understand the curves and how all that works, it's hard to photo it well, right? So again, automotive photographer, if you're looking for one in your area, you can again, Bring a Trailer is a great resource for this. You can filter results by area, like which ones are closest to you, and click on who does the best photography, and you can generally find these people. They'll generally have, for example, an Instagram account or a Facebook account, or you can find out who they are. And they're not that crazy expensive. I'll also tell you some of the ones you find, like a lot of the online auctions, you can pay an extra couple $100 to get a professional photographer. Don't waste your time. I'm here to tell you, I think they charge you $200 and you get about $100 worth of value. So if you can't resist taking a photo in your garage, I guess that's better than nothing, but it's not much better. Because think about it, if they're charging $200, they're probably paying the photographer $100 of that. So for some person to drive to your home and photo your car and spend an hour, they can't do much for $100, right? So the other thing is make sure your car's 100% ready for photos. People think, oh, it's a photo. I'm like, your car should be ready like it's going to the Concours lawn. You've already attended to all the issues, right? It's immaculately clean. For whatever reason, people say to me, oh, I didn't think it would show in the photos. It's like, why would you think that's true? It's more likely to show in the photos than in person, because in person, you're moving past it. In a photo, it's static. You can zoom in, you can look at it, you can come back to it. You send it to your buddy, and your buddy looks at it and goes, God, did you see the engine compartment? That's a mess, right? So do not take photos until the car is completely ready. And then the other rule of thumb I have is never, ever, 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 ever be the person who alters photos. It's so epidemic, it's crazy, right? Filters are for Instagram, right? So your photos should represent the car as it actually is. I see this all the time. If you're a buyer, please be aware this is happening. When you go on many of these sites, they Photoshop out flaws. They alter the lighting in such a way that you don't see them. The big one they like to do on Porsche is they change the color rendering to make it more pleasing. Well, and then sometimes it doesn't represent the car accurately. In fact, I did a presentation at Tech Tactics East, and we featured a car that was live on BAT, and in fairness, I think what happened was the seller didn't know. They hired the cheapy photographer who thought, oh, the car will look better if I amp up the green. And the car was Adventure in green, which is kind of a soft gray green. And so they amped it up. Well, the green that showed in the pictures was a very sexy green. I mean, I saw the pictures, and even me, who knows the color Adventure in green, was like, I want to buy that car. The problem was it wouldn't have been what actually showed up if you bought it, right? So don't be the person who alters the photos. It's tempting sometimes to use the super awesome filter. Don't be that person. Okay, Let's say you pass my muster, you think you can take a good photo, you're that 10%, right? A couple things that we need to know about good photography. The number one thing about photography is lighting, lighting, and lighting. It's all about the golden hour. The golden hour, if you don't know it, is sunrise and sunset, right? Within probably an hour of that. You never ever want to take photography in direct, harsh overhead light. If you live in a place like Seattle, you're both blessed and cursed because most of the time it's raining, it's no good for photography, but it's almost always cloudy. Cloudy days generally okay, although sometimes you don't get the pop of the color. But the worst thing you can have is a car in just bright, harsh sunlight, overhead sunlight, for two reasons. One, the lighting is too harsh, but also when it's overhead, you lose all the detail on the sides of the car, right? So you want to capture the golden hour. Your location is huge, right? And note to PCA, a golf course is not a good place to take photos of your car, right? A lawn is never a good place to photo a car. It just isn't, because are Porsches driven on grass in the real world? No, right? Porsches are driven on pavement or somewhere urban, right? Or on a 2-lane road. So if nothing else, you want to be thinking, where's my car? What's its genre of use? So my backdrop I might pick for a 356 might look different than I would have for a GT car, right? If I have an urban hipster 911, it might have a more urban background, and a 356, it might have a more idyllic background, right? The other things with background that you want to be thinking about is you want no distraction, right? Your car is the focal point, so ideally you don't have things, like you see a beautiful car in a photo and it's very distracting because you've got some signage in the background, you've got someone walking behind the car, you've got a telephone pole. So you want something that's kind of a blank neutral if possible. So if nothing else, you can go a good time place. So sometimes in an urban area, you can go find the back of like a strip mall and you find like a back of a grocery store and it's just a big blank brick wall or something. Sometimes it is good. It's a neutral. I mean, a lot of people try to find the heroic ones where you got like this, the perfect, Chicago skyline in the background. It's cool if you can find it, but blank is almost always better than something highly distracting. The other thing is that people, maybe we're of an age we grew up where you actually had to pay for every photo you took, but believe it or not, your phone takes unlimited photos. Take hundreds of photos. Take every angle, try every combination, try things out, right? If you don't like it, you just hit the delete button. It's really, really simple. So really do that. Then what you want to do too is don't make the mistake of then, sending someone 1,000 photos and only 25 of them are any good. Cultivate them. So then you get home, ideally do it on a computer where you can actually look at the images and say, oh, that's no good. I can see my reflection on the side. Or that one's, the lighting's bad, or it doesn't capture the fender shape, right? So go through them like that. The other thing is take them in a logical fashion. This seems obvious, but people will send me photos and it's like, oh, I got a photo of the headlight. And now I have a picture of the back bumper. Now I got a picture of the convertible top. And then the engine. It's like, well, think of it as your photos really represent, in the old days, you would have to go see a car in person. This should be sort of a walk around if they're in person. So you probably would generally start with the exterior, and the photos would have some sort of exterior flow. So for example, it's distracting for someone to see a photo of the hood, and the next thing they see is the right rear fender, because they can't kind of put that together. So think of it as almost as they're visually walking around the car. So if I'm starting in the front view of the car, now I'm moving around the sides of the car, right, various angles, right, all the way around. They don't want to bounce around. It's hard for them to, because what you're trying to get them to do is visualize the car holistically in their head. And when you bounce around, that's really distracting for them. The other thing is, things like depth of field, change your shooting height. Cars do not look good at standing height. So, God gave us the ability to crouch down, right? So you want to be able to capture your car, lay on the ground, get a ladder out, get all certain, again, you have thousands of opportunities to take these photos if you don't like them, right? But change your shooting angle. So a lot of people just get their little camera phone, they snap them all at this angle. Well, that may not be how the car looks best. Like if I got a 993 wide body and I love those rear hips, I want to get down and I want to be looking down that sight line. I want to see those beautiful hips roll, right? I want to see the light capture off of them. Something pretty simple, right? I also want close-up details. So sometimes people think every picture should just have the car perfectly filling the frame. Well, for some of our emotional shots, we want typically the subject only filling like a third of the frame. So we're capturing sort of the scene, right? And other times we want to capture just the design element. You know, we want to capture the design element in the side vent, and so the picture is just that side vent, right? So it's kind of fun to play around with. The new modern cell phones actually are pretty amazing. The other thing is on the cell phone, the other trick is don't use the zoom feature, you be the zoom, right? So I see people that they're standing there and they'll like zoom it out. I'm like, you know, you could just step back, right? Because that's all done digitally and it ruins the quality of the image. So set it and then you move around. Don't squeeze or do the zoom in with your finger, you know what I'm talking about. And the other thing is capture the car, not just the car, but all the accessories. So better than to say, I've got both keys and all the books and manuals, show a photo of the books and keys and manuals. Show a picture of the window sticker if you have it, right? All that stuff matters. Okay, video. Of course, now this is our next phase. Video is another interesting one. And one thing that's fun about video is the standards, believe it or not, oddly, the acceptable standard is much lower than it is for photography. And I would argue sometimes if it's too perfectly crafted as video, it seems inauthentic to people. So one of the best things you can do on video is buy yourself a gimbal, which is just basically a device that keeps it steady. They're cheap on Amazon, under $100, and you can hold your little cell phone and you can create a video. Because nothing worse than like the shaking video, and then it's sideways, and right? Also take it in landscape, so your phone turns sideways, not up and down. So you want to take it in landscape mode, unless you're going to post on Instagram. If you're going to post on Instagram, do it up and down. But for your typical video that's going to go on YouTube, you want to do you know, sideways. And the whole thing with your video is it's just sort of authentic. You're making the car come alive, and so you're just walking around the car. The other thing is do it in a quiet location. Sometimes people will film it. For example, don't film your whole video with the car running. Right? That's distracting. You can do a startup video if you want to do that, but don't be talking over the engine. Or sometimes people do it in an urban environment. There's people yelling, and there's a fire truck in the background, and horns honking. It's really, really distracting. So try to find somewhere quiet to make a video. This is also a time you want to do it during the golden hour. So at 5:30 in the morning when you're taking a sunrise photos and you do your video, you should be able to find a quiet location. Do not record a driving video with you driving. One, it's unsafe and you just look like an idiot. Don't be that person. That's where you get your spouse or a friend is sitting in the passenger seat, even if you don't, you know, and then a gimbal works pretty good. They can hold it. In a driving video, what you want to show is, you know, some element of like the gauges and some element of things in motion, you know, some view out the windscreen. You don't want one that just shows the gauges, and you don't want one that just shows the view out the front window, right? Pretty straightforward. And again, it's about being authentic. It doesn't have to be production grade. Just that they see, hey, the car functions, it sounds good, everything works, so on and so forth. And then the same thing I'll tell you on photography is stay out of the reflective surfaces. There's nothing more distracting than seeing the, you know, the owner in all his glory or her glory in the side window of the car. And there's some tricks to that. So practice that a few times. The basic trick is you're always just at an angle to the car, and then when you have to change angles, come up. So for example, if I'm doing inside of a car, I'm shooting this angle with my video camera, and if I need to change direction, I'll move up to show the roof as an example. I'll say, oh, I'll show you the roof, and then I can move here, and then I can come back down and I can show the wheels and things, and I'm not in the reflection of the car. Same thing when you're opening the doors. A lot of times people will come up to the door and you see their picture, right? You can kind of move over to the roof, or maybe you move and showing a detail while you're opening the door, and then you come back on the inside. Just some basic tricks. Okay, pricing. This is a tough one. The number one thing about pricing is you got to remove your owner's hat, meaning that put all your emotions aside, the fact that your dad bought this car new and that you brought your daughter home from the hospital in it. These are all important things, but believe it or not, they don't actually impact its value in the marketplace, unless you're famous, I guess. That matters. But And so what you want to do is you want to pretend you're a buyer. And so let's say you've got a car and you're selling your 2014 Porsche Cayenne GTS. Okay, well the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go on the various car sites and you're going to search, probably nationwide. Let's look at all the other 14 Cayenne GTSs that are on the market to give you a pretty good idea. And you look at the ones about your mileage, you say, okay, if I were looking to buy a 60,000 mile 2014 Cayenne GTS, here's 12 of them I can see, right? And you get a pretty good idea of like, what are they pricing them at? So if I think my Cayenne GTS is worth 60 grand because I bought it new and I picked it up at Stuttgart and it scored a 239.9 at the Concours, and I think it's worth 60, but the other 12 are priced between 35 and 42, you ain't selling your Cayenne for 60. You might get the top end of that range because it's such a nice car, right? But you're not getting 60, right? So that's what I mean by pulling off your owner's hat. The other thing I find oftentimes is that people will always pick the highest number and they'll assume they get that number and they want to do the lowest work to get it. So they'll say, well, did you see that one? It sold on BAT for 182. So I'm getting 182. And I go, have you really studied that auction? Did you notice that auction that they literally had 1,000 amazing photos, a professionally done video, the car had been dry iced, had $25,000 worth of recent service, was a very rare color combination, and your car is a nice car, but you want to do it throwing an ad on Craigslist, right, with some photos you took in your garage with your cell phone, having done none of that work, and you still think you're going to get 182. You're not getting 182, right? So don't use your the highest sale as your opportunity unless you're willing to do the work. Are you willing to put in the work to get there? So again, we're doing the competitive market analysis like we talked about. You're looking at all the other Cayenne GTSs on the market and being honest about where you fit. The other thing is know what truly drives value. So when it comes to Porsche, values are a couple things. History is a big value driver. So yeah, the fact you picked up in Stuttgart and you're the original owner does bring a pop. Does it bring $18,000? Probably not, but it does bring a pop. Color makes a tremendous difference. So you've got a black, Cayenne GTS. It doesn't bring the same money as someone has one that's in some paint to sample, uber cool color, right? So you got to factor that in. The other thing is about options. If you order this car new and you spec $73,000 with leather and trim options, it makes it this super cool car. The market's not paying you $73,000 extra for your leather sun visors, I promise you that. Generally in the Porsche world, what they'll pay a premium for are performance options. Sport exhaust, carbon brakes, sport seats, things like that. And they'll pay less for trim options with exception of paint to sample. Paint to sample almost always brings a premium unless it's like a silly paint to sample. Silly paint to sample are, and don't get me wrong, because if someone wanted this color, this is great, but take, for example, 997.2 GT3s. They only offered them in 3 colors in the RSs. So someone wanted a color like white. Okay, well that was technically paint to sample on a .2 RS, but it's not selling for a big premium because it's white. Like, white's a great color, but it was a free choice on a Boxster, right? Black. I have a customer who has a black one. He says, well, it's going to sell for this enormous premium. It's paint to sample. I'm like, it's black. Like, right? The other thing is throw out your highs and lows. Sometimes we'll get a really, really high sale. Sometimes we'll get a really, really low sale. So we got to know, generally, just like if you're selling real estate, you throw those out. And the other thing is when it comes to pricing, too high is just as bad as too low. Again, just using that real estate analogy, your car gets stale if it sits on the market and it paints you as an unreasonable seller. So if you have a car out there, and again, X is the price and you have it at 1.2X, people just go, that person's crazy, I'm not engaging with them. And the average American, believe it or not, we don't like to negotiate. So if some people say, well, I got to leave some room for negotiation, don't. Price it as you want to sell it, and believe it or not, you'll get your price. And if you just overprice it, it just sits. So, okay, where to list the car? As a general rule, the lower the price, the more localized the venue. So someone says to me, oh, I've got a 98 Boxster with 130,000 miles on it. It's a great car. Should I put this car on BAT? And I would say no, because the problem with BAT is someone has to pay a fee, and then they generally have shipping. So that's likely a $9,000 car. Well, if they're in New Jersey and you're in Seattle, they're not going to spend the $2,500 to ship it. It's 25% of the cost of the car. If you sell a $200,000 car, $2,500 to ship it is inconsequential, right? So more localized, the lower the price. The only exception to that would be sometimes I'll take a low-price car, but of course it's all relative, and I'll use that at a live auction because it seems like a value. So for example, at the Broad Arrow sale recently, the 75th anniversary Porsche sale, someone sold a very low mileage early 986 Boxster, and it achieved a record result. I think it did $47,000 or something, which is record number for a very early Boxster. But that was a good venue because ultimately in that room, $47,000 felt so cheap. It felt like a rounding error when you're selling, $1.27 million 962s, right? So how that works. We'll talk about whether you want to use a traditional sale or an auction. So a traditional sale would be, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Auto Trader, Car Gurus, one of those things, PCA Mart. Those would be a traditional sale, or an auction. And from there, we got to decide whether we're going to do a traditional auction house or an online auction. A lot of people say to me, well, Nathan, in today's world, the only way to go is an online auction. Traditional auction houses are getting blown out of the water. I would argue that's actually not true. Traditional auctions have their place and they have their venue. I sold my 991.2 Speedster at the Broad Arrow sale. It's a paint sample Bahama yellow car. It did very well. I thought that was the right venue for that car. The big advantage of a traditional sale, and I think our next presenter is going to be talking about traditional auctions, is that the auction house is a true intermediary. An online auction is not truly an auction. What someone's bidding fee would be is the bidding for the right to be the buyer at that price. But Bring a Trailer or P-Car Market or any of these other venues don't actually transact the sale. When that auction ends, you just get an email and it says, your high bidder is Chip here, and here's his email, good luck, right? Where a traditional auction house is the intermediary. They collect payment, they handle the title transaction, you never meet, the buyer and seller don't meet. And that's a pretty big value add, particularly on higher dollar transactions. And again, the other thing to remember with a traditional auction house, or if you work with a pro that people don't talk enough about, is network. So 80% of the cars that I sell, I never list for sale. So if you reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like you to sell my early 3-gauge 912, okay, I see the car, I'm excited about the car. I already have a list of people that I know are interested in early 912s. And I make phone calls, and I say, hey, I got this early Bahama Yellow 912 coming in. It's a 3-gauge car. It's a late 65 build. It's all numbers matching, blah, 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 blah. And most of the time they go, hey, once you vet the car and you go through it, and it's what you say is, I'll take it. And that's the other thing about online, or the auction houses. A lot of people think that people show up and the story is always, oh, the drunk guy. His wife pulled on his sleeve and he was drunk, and so he bought the car. I know that sounds good, but that's actually not true. The way the actual auction houses work is they have their network, and for any car of note, they've already put the buyers in the room. They do not take the risk of having a big car on stage that they don't have people. So as soon as they know they're getting a consignment on a car, they got a 917 showing up, they start working their network, and they say, hey, Bob, we got a 917 in, here's the VIN number, here's the car, here's the history, and they're already working that ahead of time. They truly don't hope a 917 buyer is sitting in one of the 500 chairs there. I promise you that. That's not how it works, right? And that's one difference between like an online auction. An online auction, when that car goes live, there isn't anyone working a network behind the scenes in an online auction. So when it hits the main page, that's its first opportunity to be exposed to the world. So it's a very, very different thing. Okay, let's talk real quick on safety. Scammers. A big problem. They're ever present. There's really nothing we can do about it. So a couple of ways to spot them. Number one is Google. Even in my world, I sit most of my day, I got my headset on, I sit on my computer. When a phone call comes in, it's someone I don't know, the very first thing I do, I copy the number, I put it in Google, and bing, I pull up and I want to know who I'm talking to. Really simple, right? I want to know who it is I'm talking to, and I'm already kind of have some background because I want to know if they're a legit person, if there's any red flags. So figure out who it is that you're talking to. So for example, you see a car listed on PCA Mart. They have their name. I'm going to Google who they are, and all of a sudden I come up and they say they were in a little town in Kentucky. Everything comes up. Oh, they're a CPA there, and I see, oh, there's a poster of them at the PCA Autocross. Okay, I know they're like a legit person, right? I can see where their house is. It all matches up. So Google's your friend. The other thing is I call it the pro buyer. So this is epidemic too. You'll list a car for sale, and immediately you'll get someone who's what we'll derogatorily call a flipper. They'll call you immediately, and they've got a whole story about your car. If they call right away and they use what I call dealer speak, they're likely in the industry, and they represent probably 80% of your initial inquiries on your car. And that isn't necessarily a problem, but they should always disclose who they are, and if they don't, which they commonly don't, be wary. The other thing is a lot of times they're advertisers. They're trying to sell you something, right? They're trying to sell you, oh, you can place your car here, or some off-brand Carfax. Just hang up on them. Or my other favorite one is the fanciful story. Who's heard this one? Oh, gosh, I'm so glad you listed this car. My son and I were just dying to have this project. The guy doesn't have a son, I promise you that. The car will be flipped and sold somewhere else by the end of the day, right? Don't fall for that. The other thing is move to a phone call or a video chat as soon as possible because you can establish who they are. We've all been around the block a few times. You get a sense someone's legitimate when you talk to them and you can see them, that their story is true. And I also tell this, know who they are before you invite them over. It always surprises me how many people will invite me to their home. They don't know who I am on a very large transaction. Just do some due diligence about that before you invite someone over. If you have any doubts, meet in public. Don't just invite some random person to your house. This is even more important when you're selling less expensive stuff, oddly enough. So you have your $8,000 car on Craigslist. Don't let some guy come over at 11 o'clock at night to your house. It seems obvious, but let's not do that. And then the last one, we get these all the time in the PCA. I call them the perennial shopper. This is the person who just wants to call and talk. Oh, Bill, I'm so glad you have your car listed. I've been trying to buy this car for 12 years. No, you haven't. If you've been shopping for any Porsche, I don't care what it is, in 12 years you haven't found it, you're not a shopper. You're a talker. Because you'll always find some reason you can't buy it at the end. So you'll spend hours and you'll accommodate and you'll take 742 pictures of every last nut and bolt on the car. And at the very end they'll say, well, I don't like the plating on the washer on the left rear taillight, so yeah, I'm out. Yeah, just know who your perennial shopper is and just kind of funny. And then real quick on payment, cash is okay for anything under 10 grand generally, but just meet at your bank and they can count it at that point. Any type of personal check or cashier's check is a no-go in my world. Your gold standard is a wire transfer. You, as the person accepting the wire, have very little risk. I know people get all freaked out about this, but the information on your wire transfer is the same stuff that's printed on a check, right? You're at very little risk. Where the biggest risk comes up is someone intercepts the instructions and then the money doesn't get sent to you, it gets sent somewhere else. So I always send my wire instructions in two forms. I'll generally send it via email and I'll send it via text as an image. And then I tell people before you send the wire, call and confirm verbally on the phone that the numbers are correct. This happens oftentimes in real estate. People will actually change the number and then magically the money goes off to Jamaica somewhere. And they always act like they don't know where the money went. I don't know how that works, but that's somehow that works. The other thing is only provide the title once your bank has said, yes, the funds are in your account. Seems obvious, but I get this all the time. Well, he seemed good. I got a cashier's check. I gave him the title. No, until you have good funds in your account, then you can provide the title. The other thing is completely fill out your title, because a lot of people like to do the classic title jump. So again, they've told you this fanciful story. You've bought a hook, line, and sinker about how he's going to rebond his relationship with his 15-year-old son after the bad divorce, and they're going to rebuild this 944 in his garage. No, they're not, right? They take your title, they don't sign anything on it, and then they sell it to someone else, and then you find out you got parking tickets in 2 states away because they never transferred stuff into their name, right? So make sure when you sell it, you fill out your side, and you have them fill out their side, and you fill it out legally as you should. And then every state has a process by which you report your sale. So you go onto your state and you say, okay, I've sold my car. Here's who the buyer is. If they give you any pressure as to not wanting to do that, they're not legitimate, right? If they're legitimately buying the car, they should have no issue you filling the title out, right? Pretty simple. And the other thing is remove your license plates. I get this call all the time, like toll bills, parking, take your plates off. Send the car, they can figure it out. You know, if you want, sometimes I've done a thing where follow them to their house and let them drive and then take the plates off and then they can figure it out from there. But pretty straightforward. So there, I'm up against my hour here. If you want to find me, here's how you can find me. You can find me on Instagram under CVLC Porsche. You can find me on Facebook under Columbia Valley Luxury Cars. My website's here, email. And then you can also find me on PCA under technical. All our tech experts are on there. You can find us there. So appreciate you guys letting me blab. I talked too much and didn't give you a chance to ask any questions, but I'm here the rest of the day today if you want to come find me. We can go from there. So, awesome.